A clean white bowl carved into the spine of the mountains, snow laid smooth as poured concrete, afternoon sun scattering off it in a hard, glittering glare. No smoke, no tracks, no movement, just wind and light. Then the first burst came in, and the world tore open. Rounds stitched the snow in a tight, deliberate arc, a line of dark divots racing toward the lead vehicle. The driver yanked the wheel and never finished the curse that was halfway out of his mouth. A single, heavy round punched through the hood. Something vital shattered, and the engine coughed itself to death with a plume of black smoke. The convoy died in the exact center of the valley floor, dead middle of 400 meters of wind-scoured openness. Contact front and high, someone yelled, voice already half swallowed by the roar. Automatic fire ripped from the tree line and the ridge above, overlapping arcs of muzzle flashes tucked into snow-dug fighting positions. It wasn't random. It came in sheets, raking vehicles, chewing at the rocks, chasing bodies that sprinted and then slid behind the thin cover of half-buried boulders and the smoking carcass of the lead truck. The snow went from pristine to shredded in seconds. Chief Petty Officer Nora Reyes hit the ground behind the second vehicle and felt the impact travel straight up her spine. Snow exploded around her, chunks of ice slapping at her exposed neck. Someone screamed short and high, cut off mid-breath. A voice she knew, but she didn't have the luxury of checking who it belonged to. Red 1. This is Red Actual. Say again your contact. The transmission cut off with a burst of static and a crackling pop. The handset in the lieutenant's gloved fist sagged. A jagged hole had blown straight through the radio's top case. Plastic and metal were ground into the snow at his knees. Radio's down, he shouted, even though everyone already knew. His voice was raw, breath steaming in the cold air, blood soaking down the side of his face from a gash along his scalp. Local only. Local only. Keep it tight. Around him, the team compressed into what little cover there was. Rios, the corpsman, was already on his belly beside a man whose right pant leg was tied off high and tight with a tourniquet improvised from tan webbing. The snow under that leg had gone from bright white to an ugly, spreading maroon. Pressure. I need more pressure. Rios barked, hands moving in practiced rhythm, fingers numb inside bloody gloves. Nora pressed her cheek to the cold, peered over the broken edge of the engine block. The geometry of the valley slammed into her all at once, cold and clay. The floor, flat and open, 400 meters of it. Their position, stranded dead center, vehicles and bodies forming a small knot of black and tan in a sea of white. To the rear, a steep wall of rock, too close and too sheer to climb under fire. To the flanks and front, tree line, ridge, and broken rock stacked in terraces, every level of firing position for the invisible enemy. They on the high ground. Every angle, every lane. A bullet sparked off the hood near her face. She dropped back behind cover, heart hammering. Mortars joined in, dull thumps from somewhere up in the trees, then delayed, stomach-twisting whumps as rounds landed in the valley proper. One fell long, geysering snow and shrapnel behind the last vehicle. Another landed short, the blast wave rolling through her chest like a physical shove. They were walking the fire in, bracketing, testing, zeroing. Spread it out, the lieutenant, Macklin, yelled, voice cracking. Don't bunch. A mortar round slammed into the snow not 20 meters away. The concussion picked him up and knocked him sideways into the drift, his words blown apart with the snow. When he rolled back into view, his face was pale under the blood, his eyes too wide. The valley answered his attempt at control with more steel. Machine gun lines were tightening, rounds clawing at every scrap of cover, punishing anyone who stayed exposed for half a second too long. Friendly return fire crackled and cracked, but most of it was blind, short bursts thrown at muzzle flashes, at movement, at trees that might or might not be hiding somebody. Nora heard it in their voices, under the training, the thin edge of panic. Breath rates too high, curses clipped off, the involuntary pitch of a man who's just realized math and terrain and probability are all stacked against him. Jam's not random, she muttered, half to herself. The dead radio, the clean timing, the perfect L shape, the mortars bracketing them with surgical steps. "This is Wyatt." Another mortar round hit, closer, showering them in snow and rock chips. Rio swore, throwing his body over the casualty to shield him from debris. Someone else cried out, then fell silent. Nora's world narrowed to a tunnel, the edge of the engine block in front of her, the snow, the ridgeline above. She sighted down the valley with the compact carbine still slung across her chest and saw nowhere safe. There was no route that wasn't crossed by multiple overlapping kill lanes. Stay, and the mortars would finish the work the guns had started. Move, and they'd be cut down in the open. It was the kind of problem the wargame slides never really solved. "Rounds! Last box!" a gunner yelled from somewhere to her left, voice high from exertion as much as fear. Rio shouted for more bandages. Macklin tried the backup radio, got nothing but a high, steady whine. For a moment, the valley was all noise, gunfire, mortars, ricochets, shouts, the flat slap of rounds hitting metal and stone. Then, cutting through that chaos clean as a blade, came a single, distant crack. It was different. Not the stuttering noise of automatic fire or the deeper blast of a mortar, but a sharp, precise report, almost delicate compared to the rest of it. Up on the ridgeline beyond the tree line, one of the enemy machine gun positions, just a stubborn flicker of muzzle flashes moments before, stuttered and went dead. The snow there erupted in a spray, and a dark shape pitched backward. The gun fell silent. The incoming fire didn't stop, but it faltered. A subtle hitch. One set of teeth in the valley's jaw had just been kicked out. Another distant crack followed. This one took a figure that had been crouched just behind the berm, a spotter, glass in hand. He dropped bonelessly, his binoculars tumbling into the snow. The pattern of mortar fire changed. The rounds came in slower, less confident, one falling short, another long, none of them as tight as before. For the first time since the ambush had sprung, the volume of fire dipped low enough for Nora to hear her own breathing. "What the?" one of the operators near her said, daring to look up, scanning the ridge with squinted eyes. "Whose? Did we get CAS on station?" Macklin asked hoarsely, half-turned as if expecting to see jets screaming overhead. There were none. "No air," Rios grunted, still working the casualty's leg. "Trust me, I'd hear it." Another precise crack. Another enemy muzzle flash on the ridge went out like a blown candle. Silence crashed in, not total, but enough of a lull that it felt like someone had put a hand on the volume knob and twisted it down. The team's own weapons still coughed, but the teeth tearing into them had dulled. Snowflakes of pulverized ice drifted lazily through the air, catching the light as if nothing was wrong. "Somebody's up there," one of the younger operators whispered, almost reverent. "Someone's cutting them off." Nora turned her head, following the line of his gaze. Far above, beyond where any of them would have considered reasonable terrain for a supporting position, the ridgeline ran jagged against the sky. Most of it was rock and snow, blank and featureless. But for a heartbeat, when the wind changed and the light shifted, she saw it. A dark shape laid out flush against the snow, almost invisible. A body prone behind a long rifle, barrel reaching past the edge of the rock. A gloved hand making a small, invisible adjustment. A exhalation that billowed into the cold air and vanished. Then the silhouette vanished back into the landscape, as if it had never been there at all. Another shot rolled across the valley, delayed, like thunder after lightning. The muzzle flashes of an enemy position dimmed, then went dark. "Whoever that is," Macklin rasped, staring up. "Keep them alive." The unseen shooter worked methodically, carving small gaps in the kill box with each trigger press, while the pin team clung to their scraps of cover and their dwindling ammunition and tried to understand how, in a valley built to bury them, a single distant rifle had just shifted the odds. A voice, calm, level, slid over the scene like its own kind of steadying fire. Hours earlier, the narrator told us, nobody listened to the one person who saw this coming. Now, her rifle was the only reason any of them would leave this valley alive. The day had started with coffee steam and rotor wash. The outpost was little more than a scatter of low, sand-colored buildings half buried in snowdrifts, connected by plowed paths of dainty ice. Beyond the wire, the mountains rose in layered shades of blue and gray, their peaks catching the first light of morning. A helicopter clawed its way upward from the small landing pad, rotors shredding the air. Its weight kicked up whirls of powder that washed over the gathered patrol like ghostly surf, dusting shoulders and helmets. Nora stood off to one side, hood up against the wind, watching the helicopter shrink to a dark dot and then vanish in the pale sky. The others had tucked their chins against the cold and gone back to their last checks, slamming magazines into pouches, pulling gloves on and off to fix straps, rattling off quiet jokes to push back against the weight of the mission brief. Inside the briefing hut, an insulated box with plywood walls and a map table scarred by years of use, Lieutenant Macklin had kept it simple. Daytime movement, he'd said, pointing with a gloved finger along a red grease pencil line on the map. Known route. We head up through the Central Valley, swing by the census site here, tap on a small X perched on the southern ridge, check the damage, confirm the data recorders survived. We drop off our guest at the listening post, turn around, and we're home before the front moves in. Their guest had stood slightly apart from the cluster of operators. Dr. Han Park wore a down jacket over body armor and carried his helmet in his hands as if he wasn't entirely sure it belonged to him. A hard case rested at his feet, secured with triple locks and bright warning labels. Winds clear, visibility good, Macklin continued. We've got a 5-hour window before the system rolls in and starts dumping on the pass. Route's been quiet for weeks. Patrols have been through that valley half a dozen times this month. Low-risk hiking, too. One of the petty officers had muttered, earning a few chuckles. Still treat it like it's not, Macklin shot back. We don't get to coast just because the map says low threat. Time is what bites us, hey. We have to be at extraction by 1600, or we're sitting tight another day and a half while the birds wait out the snow. Nora had listened from the back, arms folded, the brim of her cap shadowing her eyes. The map, the valley, the red line drawn so confidently down the middle of it, it all scratched at something in the back of her skull. The valley looked too neat, too symmetrical, like a channel someone had carved on purpose. After the brief, the group spilled out into the cold again, their breath hanging in front of them. Men drifted toward the vehicles, engines already rumbling low as mechanics checked fluids and connections. Nora laid out her rifle on the tailgate of a truck. While others joked and jockeyed for the warm spots near the exhaust, she checked torque on the scope mounts with practiced, precise movements. Click, click, no give. She cracked open her ammo case, thumbed through the rows of neatly marked rounds, each one inspected before being slid into its designated magazine. From somewhere behind her, she heard a familiar voice. You bringing the whole arsenal, Chief? It was Barnes, one of the senior operators, grinning around the rim of his coffee mug. It's a sensor check, not a war. Last time you said that, we ended up in a ditch, Rios called over, adjusting his aid-bag straps. Let the woman pack what she wants. Hey, I'm all for having a guardian angel, another chimed in. But if she's coming, I'm filing a complaint if we don't even get one good firefight out of this. Laughter circled. Some of it was good-natured, some of it edged. Nora let it pass over her. She wasn't humorless. She'd just heard variations of it for years. The extra rifle. The over-prepared one. The insurance policy. She closed the last magazine with a soft clack and slid it into a chest pouch, fingers moving with the unconscious care of someone who'd lost count of how many times she'd done exactly this and still refused to treat it casually. Outside the concertina wire, the valley lay in full, sharp relief under the rising sun. When the others walked back toward the hut to grab a last sip of coffee or make use of the chemical toilets, she stepped instead toward the perimeter berm, boots crunching on frozen gravel. She raised her rangefinder, glassing the world beyond the base. The route ahead unrolled in her mind, down the access road, up a winding shelf, and then out into the wide central valley that had been on the map. From here, she could see only the first part of it, a distant line where the landscape dipped, a faint suggestion of depth. Closer, in the near valley below the outpost, she saw tracks pressed into the snow. Vehicle prints, old and half-filled. She scanned them, felt a frown crease her forehead. They weren't right. The wheelbase was slightly off from their own armored trucks. Too narrow. The patterns staggered, as if whatever had made them had a different center of gravity. There were boot prints along the edges, too, fresher than the tracks themselves. Not from her team. Not from base security. Different tread, different rhythm. She swung the rangefinder further. Along the opposite slope, a shepherd's hut squatted under a drift, low walls of stacked stone and a sagging roof. Nora had seen smoke from it a few days before during Overwatch duty. Now the chimney was cold. The door hung half open, snow piling up inside. Footprints radiated out from the doorway like spokes, then vanished into the tree line. Too abrupt, too clean. Her eye caught on a glint high up, near the ridgeline. A pinprick flash that didn't belong to rock or ice, something with an edge, catching the morning sun at just the right angle. It winked once, then gone. She lowered the rangefinder, jaw clenched. Inside the briefing hut, the air smelled of stale coffee and heater fumes when she stepped back in. Macklin stood over the map again, double-checking coordinates with Park, who was pointing at the sensor site symbol and murmuring something about data loss windows. So, Nora said, moving closer. That valley. Macklin glanced up, eyebrows raised. Yeah. It's a funnel, she said. Open floor, steep sides, lots of high points. If I wanted to put someone in a kill box, it's where I'd do it. He looked back down at the map. Route's been quiet all month. Tracks outside the wire don't match our vehicles, she went on. Shepherd's hut that was lived in 3 days ago is abandoned this morning. Footprints into the trees. I just caught a glint up on the ridge. Glass, maybe. Or metal. Could be nothing. Could be someone ranging us. Park shifted his weight uneasily. Is that common? In this neighborhood? Nora said, common enough that I'd rather take the long way or split the movement. Put me in a spot on the High Line. Let the convoy stay in defilade as much as possible. If someone's looking to set up a shooting gallery, that valley makes it easy. Macklin chewed on that for a breath too long. He wasn't dismissive by nature, but he was young, and the clock had its hands around his neck. Alternate route adds 90 minutes, he said. We take that. We're playing chicken with the storm on the way back. And Higher HQ has already cleared this route based on recent patrols. And those patrols could have been reckoned by fire, she said quietly. Test runs. See how often we go, what we bring. He exhaled through his nose, gaze flicking from her to the map and back. We don't have the fuel margin for the long cut. I can't sell a total reroute upstairs without more than a bad feeling. It's not a feeling, she said, but she softened it with a small shrug. It's patterns. Disturbed snow where there shouldn't be, tracks that don't line up, a glint where nothing should be catching light. If I'm wrong, we waste a little time. If I'm right. He knew where that sentence went. Okay, he said, after a beat. We compromise. Convoy stays on the planned line, but we stagger the movement. You in a spot to take the high ridge along the north side. If there's someone up there watching, you'll see them before they see us. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was something. Copy, she said. I'll keep you honest from up top. Always do, he said, managing half a smile. Later, as the team assembled at the vehicles, Barnes bumping shoulders with Rios and the others, Nora stacked her loaded mags in her chest rig and zipped her Parker over them. As she slung her rifle, her hand brushed against the puckered line of scar tissue that ran under her collarbone, a thin ridge that the cold seemed to find first every winter. For an instant, the outpost around her dissolved. She was back in another valley, years earlier. Snow then too, but different mountains, different accents on the radio. The sound of gunfire echoing in a bowl of ice and rock. Her younger self prone behind a rifle, finger resting on the trigger shoe, crosshairs hovering on a figure whose raised hand was about to signal something she couldn't yet see. She had waited, hesitated, really, trying to confirm, to be perfect. The mortar landed 30 seconds later. Men she knew by first name went down and never got back up. The memory flashed and receded like heat lightning at the horizon of her mind. This time, she promised quietly, shouldering her pack, she wouldn't wait for perfect. On the march out, The convoy became a moving line of noise and color against the white. 2 armored trucks, dismounts walking staggered alongside, weapons at the low ready. Dr. Park rode in the back seat of the second vehicle, case tucked between his boots, eyes fixed on some middle distance only he could see. Nora and her assigned spotter, a wiry second class named Harlow, broke off early, angling upslope. Snow crunched under their boots, then gave way to icy rock. Their breath turned into steam in the cold air as they climbed, gaining elevation with each step until the vehicles below shrank to toys. Halfway up, Nora paused, raising her rangefinder. The sky was a bleached canvas, almost featureless. For a moment she saw nothing. Then, there, a small quadcopter, high and almost directly overhead, a speck that caught the sun as it rotated. It hovered just long enough for her to mark its position and bearing, then darted away, angling toward the next ridgeline. "You see that?" Harlow asked, squinting. "Yeah," she said. "Time." Harlow checked his watch. 10:43. She nodded once, filing the number away. Drones didn't just wander this far out for fun. She had seen this shape before, a voice would later say over footage of their climb. A valley that looked too easy. Tracks that didn't quite match. A drone watching from just far enough away. Last time, she ignored the feeling. This time, she wouldn't. By midday, the light had hardened. Shadows shrank to thin blue smears beneath rocks and vehicles. The sun perched high and unsympathetic above the peaks. The patrol's breath rose in steady puffs, quickening as they approached the central valley. From her perch on the northern ridge, Nora watched them enter the bowl. The floor of the valley spread out below like a white parade ground. The convoy rolled forward, engines alow, constant rumble. The dismounts moved alongside, a staggered cordon. Macklin's voice crackled intermittently in her ear, short updates drifting up through the thin air. "Red Actual, this is Overwatch. I've got eyes on your route," she replied, adjusting her scope. "So far looks clean." She scanned the far slopes, the tree line, the rock outcroppings. Snowfields rolled up toward the darker band of timber, where pine trunks punched through the drifts like black spears. Above that, rock faces jutted at angles, fractured by freeze-thaw cycles and time. On first look, it was quiet. Too quiet in the exact way that made her stomach knot. "Fresh scars," Harlow murmured beside her, following her glass. "Left of the convoy." She keyed her MIC Red Actual, Overwatch. "Be advised, I'm seeing fresh avalanche scars off your 1 o'clock. Snow disturbed where there shouldn't be any natural runouts. Looks like someone's been digging or moving. Something. Could be nothing. Feels off." "Copy, Overwatch," Macklin answered. His tone was calm, but she heard the subtle tightening in it. "We're crossing the center now. Keep looking." She rolled the magnification higher. There, subtle ridges along the tree line, the kind left by movement trying to look like nothing at all. Slight depressions in the snow on rock ledges. Tiny details, but they formed a pattern, like words she couldn't quite make out yet. "Harlow," she began, "I don't like." The first shot cut her off. It was a single, heavy report from the far side of the valley, so loud and sudden it seemed to split the air. Her eye tracked instinctively toward the source even as the bullet did its work. Down below, the lead vehicle lurched as if punched by a giant fist. Steam exploded from under the hood. The truck's front end dipped, caught in a drift, and stuck. Black smoke started to curl upward. "Contact! Contact front!" Someone shouted over the net, the words overlapping with the startled shouts of men in the valley. The sound that followed wasn't a chaotic spray. It was controlled, disciplined fire from multiple positions. Automatic weapons opened up from the tree line, from the rocky shelves above, from angles she realized in horror had all been pre-selected, pre-sighted. Bright muzzle flashes winked in the shadows of dug-in fighting positions. A curtain of rounds ripped across the open floor toward the convoy. "Down! Down!" Macklin barked, all pretense of calm gone. Dismounts threw themselves behind the nearest rocks, under the sides of vehicles, into shallow depressions that suddenly seemed terribly small. Nora felt the valley shape shift from map abstraction to motorist reality. Open floor, high sides, no cover worth the name. Whoever was shooting on the upper arcs. They held the L of the ambush, the long leg in the tree line, the short leg along a rock shelf that raked the convoy's flank. Her radio hissed with overlapping calls. Barnes is hit. Gun up. Gun up. Push those rounds. I'm black on eyes. Where are they? Thump. The mortar round landed behind the last vehicle, the blast throwing a geyser of snow and debris into the air. The shock wave rolled up the slope, a delayed slap against her chest. Mortars, Harlow spat, eyes wide. They've got tubes. Another thump, another explosion, this one ahead of the convoy. They were bracketing the patrol, boxing it in. The pattern was tight, too tight for guesswork. Overwatch. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions, Macklin's voice cut in. It was clipped, professional, fighting to stay level. Requesting immediate support, priority CAS. His call dissolved in a wash of static. Nora blinked. Say again, actual, you're breaking up. Eat again, over. His voice fizzled, then snapped apart. All she could hear was a steady, muffled hiss. She pulled the radio away, staring at it as if she could will it to work. Harlow, confirm you're hearing that. He tapped his own headset. Local net's fine. Long range is cooked. A chill that had nothing to do with altitude crawled up her spine. Gemma, she said. Has to be. The realization layered on top of everything else. A pre-sighted L-shaped ambush, mortar bracketing, and now a deliberate strangling of their communications. The enemy hadn't just gotten lucky. They had built this. Down on the valley floor, Rios was dragging a man by his plate carrier, boots carving twin furrows in the snow. Blood poured from the operator's leg. The improvised tourniquet bunched with already frozen cloth. Right here, Rios shouted, hauling him behind the meager protection of a half-buried rock. You move, I swear, I'll knock you out myself. The wounded man tried to laugh and failed, breath fogging in rapid bursts. Above them, mortars walked across the valley with measured steps. One landed so close the concussion flung loose snow into Rios's eyes. He blinked furiously, hands never leaving the wound. Harlow, find me that Gemma, Nora snapped, scanning. Look for something with an antenna. Doesn't have to be big. The spotter worked his binoculars fast, sweeping the ridges opposite. I've got a case on that rocky knob, about 200 meters above the tree line. Little stub antenna. 2 guys near it. She glassed the spot, saw it, a dark box half buried in snow, cables snaking into a rock crevice. The 2 men beside it had rifles and radios, faces wrapped in scarves. That's them, she said. Too far for the carbine, but not for. She broke off as a bullet slapped into the rock inches from her cheek, sending stone chips into her face. Another followed, sparking off the edge of their boulder. Counter-sniper, Harlow hissed, flattening himself. Nora edged back, heart pounding, brain scrambling to adjust. Of course they'd anticipated Overwatch. Of course they had. Anyone smart enough to wire a valley like this wouldn't leave the ridges unmanned. She took a breath, forced herself to think instead of react. From here, she had partial line of sight into some of the enemy positions. She could see the mortar team's general area, a strip of churned snow behind the tree line. She could see at least one heavy machine gun. But every time she leaned out to get a better angle, rounds snapped past, too close to be warning shots. The counter-sniper knew roughly where she was. They just hadn't nailed it down fully yet. Scope, Harlow said urgently. Check your glass. She glanced at her optic. A spiderweb of cracks had spread across the outer lens from where a near miss had struck the housing. It hadn't blown through entirely, but the fractures distorted the view, refracting light into tiny prismatic shards. Her lifeline to precision had just been compromised. Down below, the fight was growing more desperate. Gunners on the convoy trucks were pouring fire into the tree line, belts feeding through blackened hands. The barrels glowed faintly even in the cold, heat rising in shimmering waves. Every time one of them tried to adjust position or change elevation, enemy rounds laced around them like invisible tripwires. Any attempt by the dismounts to move laterally, to widen their perimeter, was met with immediate, surgical bursts of fire from the flanking leg of the L-men who tried to sprint low and fast stumbled as round chewed at the snow around their feet, forcing them flat. Their ammunition was bleeding away in short, frantic bursts, each one buying seconds but no ground. Nora watched a helmet jerk as its wearer took a round through the side. The man folded, collapsing behind the lead vehicle. No one could get to him. The space between their positions and his body was a killing lane. Overwatch. We are pinned. Macklin's voice came through on the local net now. Tight and close, the range limited to line-of-sight transmitters. Minimal mobility. We've got at least one urgent surgical, leg wound, heavy blood loss. I'm looking at 30 minutes before he crashes, maybe less. We still have 0 external comms. Suggestions? She could picture his face as he said it. Pale, streaked with blood that wasn't all his, eyes flicking between his men and the terrain that was betraying them. She swallowed, feeling the weight of her own answer. Feist, don't die, she said, because gallows humor was the only thing that kept voices from shaking. Second, buy me time. I can't break this from here. I've got partial eyes, damaged glass, and at least one shooter trying to turn my skull into confetti. Appreciate the honesty, Macklin replied dryly. We'll hold as long as we can. A mortar round landed closer to her position, the blast strong enough to rattle her teeth. Shrapnel whined past, one fragment clipping the side of her scope and deepening the cracks. She lowered herself against the rock, breathing hard, mind racing. They were in a pre-sighted kill box. The enemy had jammed their long-range comms. They had mortars, heavy machine guns, a counter-sniper, and the high ground. The weather was still clear, but clouds were already massing on the far peaks, the front creeping closer. Time, terrain, and firepower, all the axes of the problem tilting the wrong way. How long do you think they've been setting this up? Harlow asked quietly, eyes wide as he watched another burst of fire rake the valley floor. Long enough to learn our habits, she said. Long enough to know we'd call this valley safe. She watched Rios press his hands harder into the tourniquet leg, snow around them turning darker with each heartbeat. Watched Macklin risk a glance over his cover, index finger white on his carbine's trigger. Watched Dr. Park huddle behind the second vehicle, clutching his hard case to his chest with white-knuckled fingers, enemy rounds sparing his side of the truck more often than not. It wasn't random which panels the bullets hit. It never was. Their assailants weren't just trying to wipe them out. They were channeling them, shaping the chaos to a purpose. The extraction window was closing, she knew. The storm would be here by evening. If they couldn't get a call out before the snow came down heavy, air support would vanish behind the clouds, and this valley would become their tomb. She pushed back from the scope, scanning the rock around them. Okay, she muttered. We can't stay. We can't go back. We can't go forward. So we go up. Up. Harlow repeated, as if perhaps he'd misheard. She pointed with her chin to a narrow chute of ice and rock to their right, leading up and around a buttress of stone. It looked steep, exposed, and unforgiving. It's an angle they don't expect, she said. From there, I might see over their heads. See the jammer. See the spotter. See the guns that matter. And if they do expect it? Harlow asked. Then we die tired instead of just scared, she said. Either way, we're not useful here. Another mortar round shook the valley, its echo rolling up to them like a second, slower thunder. Down below, the team pressed harder into their cover, counting magazines, measuring breaths, feeling the valley's invisible walls close in with every passing second. The geometry had snapped shut. The question wasn't if it was a trap anymore. The question was whether anyone up on the ridges could bend it open again before the valley finished what it had started. Nora made the decision the way she made her shots. Fast, but not rushed. Actual, overwatch, she called on the local net. I've got eyes on your kill box, and I've identified probable jammer and mortar observation posts. From where I am, I can't do enough. I'm moving. Moving where? Macklin demanded, ducking as a burst chewed into the rock above his head. Up, she said. If you can hold for 10 minutes, I'll try to punch a hole in this thing. There was a beat of silence long enough for another mortar to land short of the convoy, snow clapping into the air. 10 minutes is generous, Macklin said. Make it count. We're not going to make a habit of this, she replied, because joking on the edge of a cliff was easier than admitting how little margin they had. Overwatch out. She flicked her radio to a lower power setting to preserve the battery and nodded to Harlow. You stay. Like hell, he said. You stay, she repeated. I need someone on this rock to relay if the local net dies. And if I eat it up there, those guys down below still need a voice on the ridge. His jaw worked, but he didn't argue again. He swallowed and reached for extra magazines instead. She slung her rifle across her back, feeling its weight settle against her shoulders. Then she opened her ammo pouches and deliberately took out half the loaded magazines, setting them carefully in a small snow hollow near Harlow. What are you doing? He asked. Lightening the load, she said. Gravity's not our friend on this one. You hold these. If I make it, I won't need them all. If I don't, no sense dragging them into the abyss with me. He forced a grin. Your optimism is inspiring, Chief. She smiled back, quick and small, then turned toward the chute. Up close, it looked worse. The ice had a blue sheen under the thin cover of snow, nearly vertical in places, broken by protruding rocks that might serve as handholds or might shear off underweight. Beyond the chute, the outcropping she wanted was a narrow shelf jutting out over the valley, offering both a commanding view and a terrifying drop. She sank the points of her crampons into the ice, testing their bite. The metal squealed but held. Her gloved fingers sought purchase on cold rock, finding the smallest lips and cracks. She climbed. Behind her, the battle continued in a distant, relentless roar. Gunfire echoed off the valley walls, muted slightly by the rock but still present, a constant reminder that every second she spent hanging on the cliff was another second the team below spent bleeding in the snow. When she was 5 meters up, a mortar round detonated close enough that she felt the concussive wave slap against the cliff face. A spray of ice splinters peppered her back. Her fingertips slipped for a heart-stopping instant. She hugged the rock, pressed flat, breathing shallow until the rain of debris stopped. Still with us, Chief? Macklin's voice came faintly over her headset. Yeah, she panted. Tell Rios if he lets anyone die before I get there, I'm writing him up. You got it, Macklin said. He says he'll do his best. She resumed the climb. Her muscles burned under the cold, heat trapped between layers of clothing and armor. Her gloves grew damp with a mix of snow and sweat. Twice she had to stop and hack small steps into the ice with the metal edge of her rifle butt, careful not to slam it hard enough to fracture anything important. Her mind tried to split, one part counting holds and checking toe placement, the other unintentionally replaying that older valley again. Different country, same basic shape. Her team then had been pinned in a narrow gorge, taking fire from a ridge they hadn't expected to be occupied. She had been in an overwatch position then too. Younger hands on the rifle, younger brain afraid of making the wrong call. She'd had a man in sights, just a flash of movement and glint, a silhouette on the skyline that matched every training slide on probable spotter. She had hesitated, waiting to confirm, waiting for one more detail to make it sure. The next mortar round had landed on a cluster of rocks where her team leader had taken cover. The sound of the explosion had been louder than this valley's. Closer, a pressure wave she swore she could still feel in her bones. When she'd finally taken the shot she doubted, the figure had gone down, but it had been 30 seconds too late. She'd replayed those 30 seconds more times than she could count. Now, with each careful step upward, she spoke quietly to herself to drown that memory out. Not with bravado, but with numbers and facts. Anchor at 200 meters. Wind 5 knots from the west. Temperature -8. Ammo type, same as always. Scopes cracked but functional. You know these holds. You've done this climb 100 times in 100 different places. Her words fogged in front of her, then whipped away on the wind. Halfway up the chute, she reached for a protruding rock that looked promising. The moment she put weight on it, the stone snapped free, skittering down the slope and taking a sheet of thin ice with it. Her body lurched sideways. For one nauseating second, there was nothing under her left boot. The valley's floor seemed to yawn up toward her. She slammed her right crampon into the ice with everything she had, felt it bite. Her shoulder ricocheted off the rock hard enough to bruise. The rifle on her back swung out, smacking into the cliff face with a dull clang. She hung there, pressed against the mountain, heart pounding so loudly it felt like another explosion. Her breath came short and fast, fogging her goggles. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, that's enough excitement." When she'd steadied, she took a second to reach back and run her hand along the rifle, fingers probing for new damage. The optic housing was more scarred now, edging toward ruin, but the glass under the cracks still seemed intact. For the moment, she hauled herself higher. Below, fire continued to hammer the convoy. The voices on the net grew fewer, more strained. Once, she heard Rio shout for someone who didn't answer. Once, she heard Macklin say, "We're down 2, possible 3. Still no external support," in a tone that squeezed her heart. 8 minutes, she told herself. "You said 10. You're not missing that window." Finally, her hand connected with a lip of rock that felt different, wider, more horizontal. She dug her crampons in and levered herself up and over, rolling onto the narrow shelf. She lay there for a long second, chest heaving, face buried in the snow. Then she rolled onto her stomach, unslung her rifle, and took in the view. From this new perch, the valley was a map again, only now she could see far more of it. The tree-lined positions that had been partially hidden by angles were exposed in profile. The slight bulge where the mortar team hid was clearly visible, along with the flash of a spotting scope. The dark box of the jammer sat near a crack, cable snaking into the rock like a vein. She could trace the arcs of fire in her mind, see where they overlapped, where they left gaps. She could see Macklin's team compressed behind their ruined vehicles, bright specks of movement against the snow. Nora dug her elbows into the cold rock, packed snow around her body to form a crude rest, and eased into a prone firing position. The shelf barely had room for her. One careless shift would send her sliding off into open air. She brought the rifle up and looked through her scope. The cracked glass turned the world into a fractured mosaic, but under the splintered lines the picture was still there. She adjusted magnification, dialed correction based on range chart she carried in her head, and found the first targets in her sequence. She felt the old tremor of fear try to find a home in her hands and refused it entry. "We've been here before," she told herself under her breath. "This time we don't freeze." Her gloved fingers settled on the trigger. She exhaled slowly, the sound lost in the distant thunder of the battle below. The 10 minutes she'd asked for were almost up. It was time to start paying them back. She built the ladder in her head, fast and ruthless. First, the enemy sniper and his spotter. As long as they were hunting her, any shot she took would be answered by one aimed at her own face. Second, the jammer. Without long-range comms, they were locked in a box no one else knew existed. Third, the mortar observer. Without eyes and corrections, the tubes down in the trees were just throwing metal at random. After that, heavy machine guns anchoring the ambush, then RPG teams, then the enemy commander, the one voice keeping their fire coordinated and focused. She found the counter-sniper first. The pair had taken a good position, half in the trees, half on rock, far enough down from the ridge that they weren't skylined. The spotter's binoculars glinted occasionally when he shifted. The shooter lay beside him, rifle pointed roughly toward her last known location. They were both patient, both careful, dangerous. She settled her crosshairs just shy of the spotter's temple, adjusting for distance and wind. The cracked scope glass threw tiny rainbows across the image, but the center was still clay. She breathed in, out. On the next exhale, she held the bottom of her breath, and the world narrowed to a finger and a target. The rifle bucked gently into her shoulder. The report rolled out over the valley half a second before the round found its mark. Downrange, the spotter's head snapped back. His binoculars flew from his hands, snow puffing around him as his body sagged. The shooter flinched, instinct driving him to roll closer to cover. In doing so, he exposed a slice of shoulder and helmet. Nora had already run the bolt. The second shot was almost reflex. Another crack, another half-second delay, and the shooter jerked, rifle sliding from his grip. For a moment, there was no answering fire in her direction. "One," she murmured. On the local net, she heard a series of surprised shouts from below as the rounds that had been walking uncomfortably close to her previous perch ceased. No time to savor. Next, the jammer. Her crosshays swept up and right, following the line of rock to the ridge where Harlow had marked the device. The dart box sat half-buried, a thin antenna stabbing into the cold air. Two fighters lounged near it, one with a radio handset pressed to his ear, the other scanning the valley with a cheap set of binoculars. She chose the one with the radio first. Again, breath, hold, squeeze. The man's chest puffed red and he folded over the device. The second fighter snapped his head around, eyes searching for the source. He started to run forward, to drag the first man away. Nora shifted her aim an inch and took him through the hip, dropping him into the snow beside his comrade. Then she moved the crosshays onto the box itself and aimed for the center mass of plastic and circuits. At this range, the shot felt almost indulgent. The bullet struck home. The jammer's casing erupted in a small fountain of shards and smoke. The faint hum she hadn't realized she'd been feeling in her ear faded. Down in the valley, Macklin's long-range radio, previously spitting only white noise, crackled and then snapped into clarity. "Red Actual. This is Sentinel. Say again. We lost you," came a voice from higher command, sudden and loud. "Status." Macklin's bark of surprised laughter cut through the net. "Sentinel, Red Actual. Complex ambush in grid." He rattled off coordinates, voice tight and fast. "We are troops in contact. Multiple enemy positions in elevated terrain, taking mortar and heavy machine gun fire. We have urgent surgical and routine casualties. Request immediate CAS and QRF. We are in the open and pinned." "Copy all," Sentinel replied. "Stand by for tasking." The valley was still a kill box. But now, at least, someone beyond its walls knew they were inside it. It didn't solve the immediate problems, but it opened the door crack. The enemy realized it too. From her perch, Nora saw movement ripple along the ridge lines. Fighters gestured, pointing in her direction. Somewhere, a commander was barking orders, adjusting to this new, unseen threat that was cutting strings on his carefully controlled marionette. A small quadcopter rose from the cover of the trees, buzzing like a mechanical insect as it climbed into the air. Its camera gimbaled back and forth, searching for the angle that hadn't existed before. "They are hunting you," Harlow's voice warned softly in her ear. "Drone." "I see it," she said. The drone wasn't positioned to hurt the convoy. Its path told her it had only one mission: find her. She was already re-aiming, tracking its jerky ascent. It was small, a tricky target at that distance, but it was coming closer, drawn by the muzzle flashes she couldn't entirely hide. She didn't have the luxury of waiting until it was right on top of her. If it marked her with infrared or even just a rough grid, the enemy could direct mortars onto the shelf she occupied, turning her little island into a crater. She lead the drone slightly, calculated its speed against the wind, and took a quick shot. The first round went wide, punching through empty air. "Come on," she muttered. She cycled the bolt and fired again. The second round clipped the drone's rotor, shearing it off in a cloud of plastic. The quadcopter wobbled, lost lift, and pinwheeled toward the ground, disappearing into the treetops. "Drone down," Harlow reported, more for his own morale than anyone else's. "Good," Nora said. "Now let's break their toys." She pulled her eye back from the scope for a second, forcing herself to reset. The mortars were still firing, though less consistently now. She could see the spotter near their position, standing on a slight rise with binoculars and a radio. He was next. She dialed a tiny adjustment, recentered, and exhaled. The first round shredded the radio handset in the spotter's hand, knocking it apart in a spray of plastic. The man stayed at it, stunned. Before he could process what had happened, her second shot took him high in the chest. He toppled backward into the snow. The mortar fire went wild. One round landed far long. The next, nowhere near the convoy. Then silence, as the crew down by the tubes, robbed of guidance, huddled low in confusion or fled. Down on the valley floor, Macklin felt the shift. "Mortars are off," he called. "This is our window. Fire teams, on me, short bounds, 2 by 2. We're pulling back to that rise at hour 3 o'clock. It's not much, but it's better than sitting in this bowl." The teams moved in bursts. 2 men up, sprinting low and fast, 2 covering. Then they'd hit the next splotch of bail of their cover, throw themselves behind it, and the next pair would move. Nora watched them from above as she went hunting for the heavy machine gun that had been anchoring the enemy's fire on the far side. She found it in a shallow dugout fringed by rock. The gunner had his hands welded to the grips of the weapon, knuckles white, as he hosed rounds across the valley. A loader crouched beside him, feeding belt from a box. She marked the loader first. The round took him through the back of the neck. He jerked and slumped forward, tangling in the belt. The gunner swore and tried to untangle the ammunition. Finite attention finally pulled from his targets in the valley below. Her second shot hit him in the chest. He toppled backward into the dugout. She fired a third round into the receiver of the weapon itself, aiming for the feed tray. Metal sparked. Something inside jammed. The barrel slumped at an angle, suddenly lifeless. "Machine gun on the far ridge is down," she reported to Macklin. "You've got less teeth on that side. Use it." "Already on it," he replied. The enemy adapted. Smoke canisters arced out from some of their positions, hissing as they landed. Gray plumes blossomed, curling and twisting in the wind, obscuring Nora's view. Fighters shifted to secondary positions further back, less exposed to her new angle but also less effective against the convoy. She saw shapes darting between trees, heard the crackle of new fire lines opening from places that hadn't been active before. They were trying to go low, to use concealment instead of obvious height. "Looks like they're not fans of your work, Chief," Harlow said. "I count at least 1 squad peeling off, heading your way." She spotted them a moment later, a group of 6 figures moving along the rocks below her incline, using the terrain for cover, angling toward the base of a shelf. "Of course they are," she said. "Never let a problem keep its high ground." She had a shot at them now, but it was marginal, the angle sharp and the rock giving them good cover. She made a quick mental decision tree. Down in the valley, an RPG team was also setting up, one fighter kneeling with a tube on his shoulder, another crouched with a round in hand, ready to load. Their arc would allow them to put warheads into the slight rise Macklin's team was hustling toward. If they were allowed to work undisturbed, the improvised landing zone would become a killing field. She had rounds left, but not enough to do everything. RPG or flanking squad? She felt the answer more than reasoned it. The RPG team had distance to close and could still be disrupted by small arms from below if someone spotted them. The squad climbing for her had only gravity between them and success. If they got directly below her shelf, they could fire upward into her position, or worse, climb up and turn this outcropping into a knife fight where her rifle was more liability than asset. Killing the RPG team might save lives in the short term. Neutralizing the flanking squad would allow her to keep saving lives for the rest of the engagement. She swung her rifle to the squad. The point man's head broke cover first, just enough for him to check their upward path. Her shot hit him just as he opened his mouth to say something. He dropped, his body pinwheeling down the slope, knocking one of his teammates sideways. The others flattened instantly, hugging the rock. One began firing blind in her direction, bullets smacking into the cliff face below her. "Squad approaching me is engaged," she reported. "One down, others slowed. You've still got that RPG team, but I don't have a clean angle on them yet." "We'll handle it," Macklin said, though the strain in his voice made handle sound ambitious. He and his nearest fire team were nearly at the low rise now. They dug behind it, snow flying. One of his men popped a colored smoke grenade, the canister spinning as it flooded the air with a bright plume. "Get that bow to target," Macklin told them. "What bird?" one of the younger operators asked, breathless. "The one that better be inbound," Macklin said. High above, a faint rumble was starting to build. Nora knew that sound well, the deep, rolling note of rotary wings beating air. "Sentinel to Red Actual," the radio crackled. Be advised, gunships and lift coming your way. 5 minutes. Mark your positions with colored smoke and IR if able. Be advised, you are hot. Copy hot, Macklin said. We'll still be hay. Nora finally managed to find a sliver of the RPG team through the smoke and shifting bodies, a glimpse of the round as the assistant gunner tried to slam it into the tube. She took the shot. The bullet hit the round's resection just as the gunner's thumb brushed the trigger mechanism. The rocket fired early, while still half-loaded. It tore free in an ungainly arc, spiraling drunkenly skyward before detonation and empty air, showering harmless fragments over an unoccupied patch of snow. RPG team disrupted, she called. They are reeling. That's our break, Macklin said. All elements, push to the rise. Last man move. The team surged as one, trusting the diminishing fire to their flanks. Rios and 2 others carried the worst of the wounded, stumbling but refusing to let the man's boots drag. Dr. Park hunched over, clutching his case and panting clouds into the cold air as he ran. The enemy commander appeared for the first time in her sights as she scanned for new threats. He'd climbed onto a rock above one of the tree-lined positions and was gesturing sharply, trying to restore order to his unraveling ambush. His body language radiated fury and urgency, arms cutting through the smoky air as he pointed toward Nora's perch and then down at the convoy. He was shouting, though she heard nothing from this distance. She centered him in her cracked scope. This was the node where all their lines converged. Kill him, and their coordination would fray further. Leave him, and they might yet salvage enough cohesion to make the incoming helicopters pay dearly to land. She took a slow breath. The world shrank again to crosshaze and heartbeat. When she fired, the round traveled the distance in a breath's time and hit him mid-gesture. His body arched backward, then fell, sliding off the rock to vanish into the smoke below. The effect was immediate. Fire patterns along the ridges faltered. Bursts grew shorter, less controlled. Some positions went quiet entirely as fighters ducked into cover, unsure who was in charge. Whoever just took out the guy on the rock, I owe you a drink, Macklin said, breathless as he skidded behind the rise. Put it on my tab, Nora said. On the far side of the valley, a pickup truck roared away from a tree-lined gap. It jolted over frozen ruts, rear wheels fishtailing in the snow. In the truck bed, she saw a huddled figure, hood over their head, hands bound. 2 fighters flanked the captive, rifles clutched tight. Her stomach twisted. The vehicle wasn't driving toward the fight. It was driving away, toward the gap that led deeper into the mountains. She tracked it, brain running the implications. If they made it out, they'd vanish into the network of passes and gullies. The captive, someone from the area, maybe one of their local guides, would vanish with them. So would any clues about how they'd set this ambush up so precisely. And the fighters in the truck would live to set more. She had a shot. At this range and angle, if she put a round through the windshield and into the driver, the truck would likely flip or slam into something. In the violence of that crash, the person in the bed might easily die. Or she could aim for the engine block, try to disable it without turning the cab into a coffin. Hardest shot. Less margin. She didn't have time to debate with anyone. It was her trigger, her responsibility. She chose. Her crosshays dropped lower, onto the front of the truck, where the heat shimmered off the engine. She compensated for its speed, wind, the slight slope it was climbing. Her breathing steadied. She fired. The round punched through the grill and vanished inside. An instant later, the truck's front end dipped, and a geyser of steam and smoke erupted. The vehicle slewed sideways, tires losing traction. It skidded, swerved, and then plowed into a snowdrift, burying its nose. The fighters in the back were flung forward. One tumbled completely over the cab, landing in the snow. The other sprawled against the side, weapon knocked loose. The hooded figure bounced hard but remained in the bed, scrambling to get upright. Truck's disabled, she said, exhaling. Looks like at least one prisoner alive. Copy, Macklin said. We'll grab them if we live through the next 10 minutes. The distant rumble had grown to a palpable vibration in the air now. Gunships broke over the ridge, dark shapes against the graining sky, rotor wash sculpting plumes of snow below them as they banked hard into the valley. The sight hit Nora's system like adrenaline. The helicopters rolled in, nose guns already tracking. One banked toward the tree line, hosing the edges of enemy positions with suppressive fire. Another hung back, ready to swing over the makeshift landing zone where colored smoke marked Macklin's position. The enemy, seeing air arrive, made their own last moves. The flanking squad below Nora made a desperate push, realizing they were running out of time to eliminate the sniper who'd been dismantling their carefully laid trap. Three shapes peeled off and climbed at a dead sprint, using the distraction of the helicopter's arrival and gunfire to mask their approach. Nora saw them when they were almost directly below her shelf, too close for comfort, rifles slung across their chests, hands scrambling for purchase on the same ice she'd climbed minutes before. Her magazine was nearly empty. She took the first climber in the shoulder, the impact spinning him sideways. He slid, boots skittering, before he lost purchase entirely and tumbled down the slope, his body smashing into rock and snow until it lodged against a small outcrop. The second climber flattened against the ice, firing upward with one hand. Bullets chewed into the edge of her shelf, sending shards of rock stinging into her cheek. One round glanced off the stock of her rifle. Another tore a groove in the snow an inch from her elbow. She fired back, the shot catching him low. He grunted and slumped, clinging for a second before gravity peeled him away. The third man, closer than the others, raised his rifle directly toward her. At this angle, she could see his eyes, narrowed with focus, his mouth set. Her bolt slammed home on an empty chamber. She knew the feel of that hollow click better than her own pulse. There was no time to reload, no room to roll to a sidearm without exposing more of herself. Her world shrank to the sight of his finger tightening on the trigger, the black tunnel of his barrel. She worked the bolt anyway, reflex fighting reality, knowing it was futile. It didn't matter. The action clacked, and there was nothing waiting to go forward. The enemy's rifle jerked as he fired. Then his head snapped sideways. The round that killed him hadn't come from her gun. Harlow, farther down the ridge, had broken his own cover to take the shot. His smaller rifle didn't have Nora's reach, but at this distance and angle, it didn't need to. The climber toppled backward, sliding down, a limp puppet on invisible strings. "Thought you might need a hand," Harlow said, breathing hard. Nora swallowed, throat suddenly tight. "Thanks," she managed. She slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle, knowing it was her last. Below, the gunships raked the retreating enemy positions, forcing fighters to abandon their holes and melt back into the trees. Some broke contact, disappearing into the terrain. Others tried to stand and were cut down. The first lift helicopter flared over the improvised landing zone, skids kicking up clouds of snow as it touched down. Macklin's team hustled the worst of the wounded toward it, bodies bent double, heads tucked. Dr. Park stumbled aboard with help, his hard case still clutched like a lifeline. "Red Actual, this is Talon 1, the pilot's voice came over the net. "We can take 6+ litter on this bird. Make them count." "They all count," Macklin replied, but he prioritized without hesitation. Rios and another operator loaded their urgent surgical first. The flag-draped bag remained on the snow. The remaining enemy, rudderless and under air attack, broke off. Some fled into the trees, weapons slung, no longer interested in dying for a plan that had been systematically dismantled. On the far side of the valley, a handful of fighters near the crashed truck tried to rally. They fired a few last angry bursts toward the departing convoy, then helped their captive out of the bed, hands still bound. "Those guys near the truck are your last live source," Norris said to Macklin. "If you can, don't let them slip." "Copy," Macklin said. "We'll see what we can do." Another helicopter came in, taking its place as the first lifted away. The valley air became a storm of snow, rotor wash, and spent brass. On her shelf, Nora felt the adrenaline drain from her limbs, leaving behind a heavy shakiness. The world seemed too bright, the snow too white. Each breath hurt in her chest. She looked at the remaining rounds in her magazine and counted them without really thinking. 1, 2, 3. Down below, the flanking squad, what was left of it, had vanished, either dead or retreating. The drones were down. The mortars were silent. The heavy machine gun she'd targeted was a smoking, useless piece of metal. The valley was still a dangerous place. But it was no longer the perfect execution chamber it had been minutes before. She watched until the last of Macklin's men were aboard, until Rios himself finally stumbled into the helicopter, face gray with exhaustion but upright, until Dr. Park's case was strapped down and the bird lifted away with a roar. Actual Overwatch, she said into the net when the second bird began to ascend. Anyone still on the ground? Negative, Overwatch, Macklin replied, voice shaky with relief. Everyone who's still breathing is in the air. Copy that, she said. I'll egress on my own route. Roger, he said. And Chief, whatever you did up there, it was the difference. She didn't answer right away. She was looking at the valley she'd just helped pry open and thinking about another valley years before. This time, she said finally, we'll talk about it later. As the last helicopter banked away toward the outpost, she reached up and flicked her rifle's safety on, the metallic click oddly loud in her ears. The wind rushed past, carrying away the smoke and the echoes. The kill box had been broken. Now all that remained was to understand why it had been built in the first place. Back at the outpost, the war shrank to walls again. The helicopter skids touched down on the pad with a jarring bump. Medics and corpsmen rushed forward, gurneys already rolling. Boots clanged on metal as the wounded were offloaded, their groans and muttered curses joining the bleak chorus of the rotors. Inside the aid station, a tent reinforced with plywood and hope, Rios and the other medical staff went straight back to work. Gloves on, scissors out, gauze and blood and the steady beep of monitors. Some of the men Nora had watched from a distance now lay on tables under harsh white lights, their uniforms cut open, skin pale and slick with sweat. Some would live. One, under a flag near the back, already lay still and quiet, his dog tags resting on his chest. Nora stood at the entrance for a moment, snow melting off her boots onto the rubber mat. She watched Rios lean over his urgent surgical, voice a hoarse murmur as he ordered meds and clamps. You going to stand there gawking or come inside and get out of my doorway? He called without looking up. She stepped aside, letting another gurney through. Outside, the air was colder than it had been that morning. Clouds banked heavy over the peaks now, the leading edge of the storm. Snowflakes drifted down, small and tentative. Macklin found her near the corner of the building, leaning against the wall, helmet hooked on one thumb. His head was bandaged, a strip of white cloth peeking out from beneath his cap. His eyes looked older than they had at dawn. Chief, he said. Sir, she replied. For a heartbeat, they just stood there, the distance between them filled with things neither quite knew how to say. Intel's got you next, he finally said, nodding toward the briefing hut. They want to reconstruct the ambush while it's fresh. Of course they do, she said. They walked together. Inside, the hut had been converted from mission planning space to investigation room. The map table was covered in printouts, drone stills, satellite shots of the valley, hand-sketched diagrams of enemy positions based on what they'd seen and what they'd taken off the bodies they'd managed to recover. Dr. Park sat at one end of the table, his case now open, revealing arrays of drives and recorder modules. A senior intelligence officer stood beside him, pen tapping against a notepad. Chief Reyes, the intel officer said when she stepped in. We've been waiting to pick your brain. She gave them what she had. She described the tracks she'd seen that morning, the abandoned shepherd's hut, the metallic glint on the ridge. She outlined the drone she and Harlow had spotted en route, the time, the bearing. She sketched the positions she'd identified in the valley, mortar pit, machine gun nest, jammer case, sniper hide. On the screen, someone played back footage recovered from the crashed drone near the jammed ridge. It showed the convoy entering the valley from a high angle, tiny ants on a white sheet. Whoever set this up, the intel officer said, had eyes on your pattern for weeks. They knew your patrol routes, your timings, and they knew the value of what Dr. Park was carrying. Park shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Those recordings were sensitive, he admitted. Not just chatter, but emissions profiles, source locations. In the wrong hands, They are a roadmap to our ease and blind spots. The interrogations from the captured fighters began to filter in as the day wore on. One of them, taken from near the disabled truck, talked more than the others. Fear, pain, and the sudden realization that the long arm of his cause didn't reach into this plywood room loosened his tongue. They'd had local help, he said. A man in one of the villages who had been paid and threatened in equal measure. That man had a radio, a small, high-end set that received encrypted bursts at irregular intervals. The bursts carried patrol schedules, vehicle counts, names, sometimes. The ambush in the valley had been meant to do more than kill a squad. The goal had been to capture Dr. Park and his drives, to parade him on camera for propaganda, and to siphon off the data before broadcasting demands. And test our response, the intel officer said quietly, tapping his pen. See how quickly we can react. How we handle a complex ambush. How we deal with jamming. All that effort, Macklin said, staring at the map. And they still couldn't close the deal. Because someone up on that rock didn't do what they expected, the intel officer said, nodding at Nora. They had Overwatch positions mapped. They had probabilities. They did not plan for one rifle to climb into a place that's stupid and that effective. She shifted under the attention, not used to being the center of a briefing. What you saw this morning, the tracks, the hut, the glint, the drone, the intel officer continued. Those were all early warning signs. We should have treated them as more than background noise. Macklin's jaw tightened. I should have treated them as more than background noise. Nora shook her head. We all played the math we had, she said. The route had been quiet. Timelines were real. The valley looked like it always did. That's what they were counting on. And you still climbed, Park said. His voice was softer than before, carrying the tremor of someone who'd had his first real brush with how thin the line between briefings and funerals could be. She shrugged one shoulder. The slide deck didn't have a better idea. Later, when the formal debrief was done, the maps were rolled back up. The day shifted into that strange, heavy quiet that followed every hard fight. Outside the hut, Barnes caught up to her. He had a bandage on his forearm and a limp he tried to hide. Chief, he said. His usual wisecracking grin was gone, replaced by an awkward half-smile. Look, about this morning. The jokes. About you being overkill. She raised an eyebrow. I've heard worse. Yeah, he said. Well, I'm just saying, I'm glad Command insists on overkill. He stuck out his hand. It was a small gesture, but there was weight behind it. She took it. His grip was firm, a wordless apology and a thank you all in one. Save it for Rios, she said. He's the one elbows deep in our mess right now. Already did, Barnes said. He told me to stop bleeding on his flaw. That tracks. Later still, when the light turned weak and gray and the first real flakes of the incoming storm began to fall in earnest, Nora walked out to the small range just beyond the outpost. The bayou was a simple wall of packed earth, stained dark from years of rounds. Melted snow had refrozen into rutted ice in front of the firing line. No one else was there. She laid her rifle on the worn wooden table and began to strip it down. The optics outer lens was a lost cause now, more cracked than glass. She unscrewed it carefully, held it up to the fading light. It caught the snowstorm in a fractured reflection. She could feel the weight of the scar under her collarbone as she turned the broken glass in her fingers. Old valley, new valley. Old hesitation, new decisions. She set the optic aside. With slow, methodical movements, she cleaned the rifle's barrel, brushed carbon from the action, wiped down the metal. Her hands moved with the ritual comfort of 1,000 prior cleanings. Only when she reassembled it did she pause, fingers resting on the worn metal. This weapon had pulled her through time, in a way, from the girl who froze up on a ridgeline, to the woman who climbed where she shouldn't and shot until the valley's teeth fell out. She accepted the scars on the rifle the way she had begun to accept the ones on herself, as part of a story that hurt, but didn't own her. Inside the ready room that evening, new arrivals to the outpost gathered, shoulders hunched against the cold. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Cards slapped on tables. Someone had a guitar out, picking its strings out of tune. In one corner, two younger operators leaned over a tablet, watching raw footage from the valley, grainy and jumpy. They were talking low, just audible over the clatter. "You see that?" one said, pointing at a distant, barely visible muzzle flash on a ridge. "That one shot. The angle. That's when the machine gun on the east ridge went dead." "That's her." "Thought she was just another rifle," the other replied. "Didn't even know she was on the manifest until we were wheels up." "Yeah," the first said. "Tell that to the guys who got on the bird because she decided to be a ghost on a cliff." The story was already mutating, the edges sharpening. In some versions, she'd made twice the shot she had. In others, she'd hip-fired at helicopters. Within a week, someone would claim she'd hiked up the mountain with 2 rifles and a rocket on her back, just for fun. Nora knew how these stories grew. She also knew they were never quite true, and never completely false. Somewhere between myth and after-action report, the real work lived. The part where fear and function coexisted, where people did what needed doing not because they were fearless, but because they were needed. She stepped into the ready room long enough to grab a mug of coffee. Barnes lifted his chin in greeting. Rios nodded from a corner, dark circles under his eyes. "Ghost on the ridge," one of the younger men whispered, nudging his buddy as she passed. Nora pretended not to hear. She wasn't interested in titles. Outside, snow had begun to fall in earnest now, thick flakes spinning in the wind. The world beyond the base's lights dimmed to a soft blur. She walked out into it, coffee cup warming one hand, rifle slung across her back. Her silhouette quickly became just another dark shape in the drifting white, then vanished entirely as the storm folded around her. In the voiceover that would one day accompany the footage from the valley, the narrator's final words would come as the camera lingered on a similar image, the faint outline of a lone figure on a snowy ridge, rifle on her shoulder, turning away from the camera and into the wind. "Not all rescues come with fanfare," the voice would say. "Not all heroes announce themselves. Sometimes the loudest victories belong to the quietest trigger pulls, the ones no one notices until the shooting stops."